Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for coming. Thanks to Trailhead. Thanks for standing in line outside. It's a huge line. We appreciate you guys being here first thing in the morning. So we're here to tell you all about our new API called the User Interface API. And I'm Kamyar, the product manager, and that's Chris, our lead engineer for the User Interface API. We have to show you this. I'm sure you've seen it already a million times. We're going to talk to you about some upcoming features. So we just want to point out that because of the forward-looking statements, you should always make your purchasing decisions and implementation decisions based on the current functionality of our products, not upcoming functionality. Too much. So what's the purpose of the User Interface API? We've invested a lot of time and expertise into building Salesforce1 and Lightning Experience. And it's time now for us to share all that expertise with you for making it easier for all of our developers, customers, partners to build user interfaces on top of Salesforce applications.
Get closer.
Yes. There we go. All right. So what are the benefits of the User Interface API? Well, they're great because they allow you to build and take advantage of the metadata that you've configured in Salesforce, and we provide you with the metadata and data in the same endpoints so that you can build UI faster and easier. As I said before, they are the API, and they are the middle layer that powers Salesforce1 and Lightning Experience. So you're getting access to API that have been tested over the last several years as we have built our new user interfaces. And the reason we're providing this is because we know you have a lot of use cases where you want to build parts of Salesforce either in your own apps, whether they're native mobile apps, on Heroku, et cetera, and we want to make all that available to you without having you become experts in how to do field-level security and record sharing and all the other stuff that goes into it. We'll handle that for you. OK, so let's cut over to Chris. He's going to show you a demo of a couple of apps that we've built, and then we'll come back and talk more about what the API do.
Hello. So this is just a demo app I put together using React and Node with this new user interface API. We're just using regular OAuth and using cores to do the requests from the client. So you can set up cores and set up in Salesforce. So just take a look at one of the records in this sample org. So here's a sample quote. We just rendered it. That just made a request out to the user interface API that returned information about the layout, the entity metadata, and a particular record all at once. So if we take a look at the network traffic, it's not there yet. There we go. So if we take a look at the network traffic here, you can see we made a GET request here to this UA API record UI endpoint. We gave the ID. We said form factor large and view and edit mode. And it returned us a JSON payload that includes layouts, object info, and the record all at once. The layout gives you information for this combination of pivots. It gives you a bunch of layout sections. And the sections have headings and the items within the layout. So here's the quote number at the top left, and it has a single component that's a field. And then separately in the payload, we have the actual record data. So it just has all these fields and the values for them. So it just took one API request to render this whole page here. We have a whitelist of standard entities right now that's growing for the next release, hopefully. So here is a account. And same thing, it just made one request to do all this. And it looks exactly like it does in SFX. So it's the same stuff here. Oh. It matches the current layout. So if I go into setup, and I change the account layout, which is always fun. So I'll take out the industry. Oh, that's the highlights, sorry. I'll take out the billing address. Hopefully that's the right place. And if I go back to here, it used to have billing address. And if I go back, made new request, and now the billing address is gone. So it's always going to be in sync with the metadata changes that you make. We support, editing and cloning and things. So I just hit edit, and now we've got some pick list items. This code is asynchronously retrieving the pick list. So when I hit that, no, that's a bad deal. Oops. There's one that works somewhere. So when I click that, it just made an asynchronous request to get the pick list values. And so I can set that to something else and then save it and update it. Similarly, so this is on GitHub, CC-more-SF record viewer. It's you can tool around and file issues and pull requests and such. We've also got a React Native implementation that's similar code, and I've got that running here in a simulator. So it's doing the same stuff. If I just click on this, makes a single request, gets all this information all at once, and you can edit it or whatever you want. There. So that's part of what the API lets you do.
Right. OK, so you saw Chris quickly demo this. You saw how fast that was. It's great because, as I said earlier, you get the data and all the metadata that you need to render that page. The metadata that we give you reflects all the admin configuration and any changes. So when your admin goes in, and if you build an app, or if you build a page, or if you build a widget and embed it in, let's say, your intranet site or in another third-party system, and your admin goes in and, let's say, changes security for a user or adds an extra field to your compact layout or your detail panel, then you don't have to deploy code. This already reflects those changes. And it responds to user profiles, record types, all the good stuff that you guys are all familiar with as far as our platform goes. And then the same API supports form factors. So you saw the desktop view in the Heroku app that Chris showed first. And then we also used the form factor of mobile to then get a layout that's reflective of the smaller page so that we tell you how to arrange the fields so that you can take advantage of them, just like we do for Salesforce1. If you configure your fields to be 2-column, when you switch to mobile format, it's hard to see it in 2 columns. So we have logic that says, move the fields around this way so they're vertically aligned. And you can use the same concept if you're on Heroku and you want to build a responsive page so that when people adjust the width and the height of the app, you can move from mobile to tablet to desktop without really changing your code. And we've given you a lot of cool stuff. Chris showed you the pick list and the clone functionality, the edit. I really like the pick list because we've demystified dependent pick lists in our user interface API. They're much easier to use. Go take a look. And let's see. We wanted to do records first because that's really the basis for everything else in our user interface API. And it's really the most important and the difficult part of yeah. This thing needs a user interface API. So it'll be faster. Okay, so let's talk about, again, why we built this. What are some of the good things about it? What are some of the things we recommend you doing with it? And then what are some of the things that we don't recommend you doing with it? And as I said earlier, they're for building, maybe mobile apps that are very exclusive to like your business processes or your on-platform functionality. Same thing with the responsive web pages. What we don't recommend them for are system integration. So if you're already using our SObjects API, our enterprise API to, let's say, import-export data between Salesforce and a third-party system, continue to use that API. This is really not meant for that use case. We don't want you to go rebuild the entire Salesforce UI because, why? We already give you Lightning. Our Lightning components are built on top of this API. So if you're familiar with, and hopefully you attended the session yesterday about force record data, which is a product we call Lightning Data Service, that's all built on top of the same API. So if you're building Lightning components, pretty soon, when that product is GA in our winter release, same as our user interface API, you'll be able to build Lightning components with the serialized versions of this API with all the authentication handled for you because you're on platform, and be able to take advantage of the ease and convenience of Lightning components without having to write Apex controllers, which is something that our partners and customers have been asking for a long, long time. And the other thing you have to keep in mind about our user interface API is that we are going to strictly enforce our support model of 3 years. So we will support versions of this API. Yes, they are versioned, which is awesome. We're going to support them for 10 releases, and then we're going to drop them. And the reason we do that is because since we provide you with metadata and data, we cache the metadata so that your apps can be super fast. And because of that caching, if we support versions forever, that's just not going to scale. So we have to draw the line. And why don't I just come over here? Yeah, there we go. OK, so I already sort of got ahead and talked to you about the advantages, which are the caching. And the reason we recommend this API is because we give you a lot of flexibility for reducing the number of over-the-wire calls, right? So because we give you the metadata and the data together in one API call, you just cut down the number of times, especially for mobile use cases where you have to go over the wire. So that also makes it faster. And then the API framework gives you the ability to do things like bulk upload or ask for a particular part of the payload if you want to do caching in your app and cut down further the amount of over-the-wire traffic that you have. So it's really, really optimal for those types of use cases. They are really easy to use, and you'll see that. I think Chris showed you the JSON responses. He's going to do another demo where he'll step through some of the code. So we'll show you that. And we've also normalized or made it canonical across all the different objects. So if you're building using our API, let's say for account, the same payload is going to, and the code that you've written can support any other object like opportunity, quotes, et cetera, that you saw him demo. All right, so here is our, this is where you can find our sample code that Chris showed you already. We'll show you these links again in the Q&A section. And
OK, so yeah, the code's here on GitHub. To give you a bit of a closer look at some of this sample code, here is the web app. And I just built it using React for the first time, which is fun. And it is set up with Docker, and we host on Heroku, and I'm using React and Redux and Sagas. So Sagas is a plugin for React that lets you do asynchronous requests and chain them together without having to deal with all the callbacks individually. So that's what I'm using to retrieve the record information. So right here is Just putting together the URL to get to hit that endpoint that gives you data, metadata, and layout information. So we're just throwing together a URL that's UI API, record UI, giving it a record ID, and saying I want the large form factor. So I want the layout to be appropriate for the bigger screen to match what we do in Lightning Experience, and saying I want the view and edit modes. So it's going to give us both, in the JSON comes back, it's going to give us the fields appropriate for view and the fields appropriate for edit. And then all I'm doing is sending a request with the right OAuth access token. Using the Sagas framework, it means I do a yield, so it means kind of like send off the asynchronous request, and then sometime in the future it gets back again, we get the JSON, we send out this action to say we got this record. So if you're familiar with React, that action gets sent out, and it gets reduced later on. So when we, in the state reduction, when we handle this receive record event, we just call this helper method called getLayoutModel, which does a small bit of massaging of the payload, but really not a heck of a lot compared to what you had to do before. So we're just finding the various layouts inside, dealing with the record types a little bit, and then munging the sections and rows and the items a little bit to flatten them out and get ready to present. And then the component for the record does all the presentations. So we have a record that has sections, the sections have rows, and then each row we just render the items based on, just render some text for most of them, except for custom links get their own little thing. So it's all generally pretty simple to use, and the goal was to give you an API that's oriented towards this type of use case where it's a web app or JavaScript, and you want to use single chunky payloads to get everything back that you can at once. Some of the other requests we're making are to do an update. So here again, it's a similar endpoint. It's just the record data we're updating. So this is the URL here. And then we put together a input payload to update a couple fields and just send it off. So if you take a look in here, if I do an update on this record, let's say I'll change this to 2503, and I will set the name to quote 123. If I save that, then this is all the JSON that I'm sending to the server to do that. I'm just saying, for these fields, name, set it to quote 123, shipping handling, set to 2503. And when I go back, then there's those values are there. The React Native app is basically the same stuff. So it's using the same frameworks, and it just has iOS and Android versions that come out. We also use, when we process the stuff that we get back, in the entity metadata that we return, we give you arrays of the pick list URLs for different record types. So fields that are based on pick lists, we get those URLs. So then we just hold on to those and then make requests later on to those pick list URLs to get the various values. We separated the pick lists out from the main payload because sometimes pick lists can be huge and have like 10,000 items, and we don't want to blow up the client by returning all the pick list values for every record type all at once. So yeah, the code is up on GitHub again, and feel free to check it out.
Great, thank you, Chris. And
You want to read that
just
one?
making sure I'm on the right slide. OK, great. So let's do a quick recap. The user interface API in our current summer 17 release is in developer preview. So if you have a DE org, it's automatically on. We're also running a customer pilot, which is a closed pilot. So if you have a sandbox and you want to see how this API works with your own sandbox data, reach out to your account team, get them to nominate you for the customer pilot, and I'm happy to go turn it on for you in your sandbox.
Oh, and also just to clear, it used to be called the Lightning API, and it got renamed the User Interface API this release, just in case there's some
Right.
It's
Thank you, Chris.
marketing change.
Yes, we started out by calling the API Lightning API, but we decided that it doesn't make sense to brand API, and let's just talk about what it does. So we changed it to User Interface API. And we support a whole bunch of standard objects, but one of the reasons that it's in developer preview and pilot is because we don't yet support all the standard objects. Our goal for GA, which is our next release, winter 18, is to support certainly the hero entities, as we call them, the hero objects, but most of the objects, if not all the objects, are going to be supported. We just need some time to clean some things up before we expose them publicly. And obviously, custom objects are supported. So if you're building on platform using your own custom schemas, et cetera, you should be able to just do that. And this is the sharing our roadmap with you, the family of endpoints. So the stuff that has the star are the things that we're GAing with. So we showed you the records endpoints that include layout and object metadata, the create, edit, view, clone modes, the default values, as well as the pick list and the dependent pick list. As I said, we've sort of demystified how all that works, so hopefully you'll take advantage and let us know if we've done a good job. We're also including child relationships. So if you've ever worked with junction objects and junction lists, they're very, very complicated to work with in the API. We've simplified that. Yeah. We have an engineer that got a PhD in how to do that. So we've really simplified that in our API, and it's really, really nice. So if you happen to have a very complex org with lots of junction objects, highly recommend that you take a look. We're also going to expose actions, at least the list of actions in winter 18. So by list of actions, I mean if you're in Salesforce1, you see our action bar at the bottom. If you're in Lightning Experience, you see the ribbons of actions with the drop-downs on record pages, list views, et cetera. Currently, those lists are only accessible through SOCL. We are actually providing a user interface API for those as well, so they're much easier to actually retrieve, cache, et cetera, for your custom experiences. And then next item on our things to tackle are lists. We recognize that after records, list views are the most popular thing in our apps, so we're working on that right now as we speak. And hopefully in winter 18, you're also going to see the user interface API for the favorites functionality as well. So it's a really cool functionality. It's only available right now in Lightning Experience. It's the little star in the header that allows you to favorite or bookmark or whatever you want to call different pages in the app and navigate to them quickly. The API for that is also going to get exposed publicly. And we're going to also work on some other stuff like dependent lookups through search, et cetera. And like I said, since these API power the components in Lightning, a lot of what we expose publicly as far as Lightning components go and Lightning-based components go, go hand in hand with the roadmap here. So chances are, if you're attending a Lightning session where they're talking about upcoming Lightning components and you see their roadmap, you'll see that it's closely aligned with what we're doing here. OK, so we have about 5 minutes left. I want to open it up for questions. Feel free to come up and ask your questions.
Have you guys thought about making the UI API accessible to session IDs generated without API access? So straight from a Lightning component or Visualforce page, maybe in a professional edition org, or just a user who doesn't have API enabled.
Do you mean like through Apex?
From JavaScript, I just have a session ID that I can pull from, whatever, from Apex, from Visualforce, but it may not be an API-enabled session ID.
Oh, OK.
So our API framework supports OAuth 2, like you saw Chris log in, but our framework also supports using the session ID from Salesforce as a token. So there's ways to get that. But the other part of your question is, to be able to access these in Lightning, there's really no reason to access the REST versions in Lightning because we're going to give you the serialized versions in Lightning that you can access directly. So what we're working on right now is, as I mentioned, force record data is basically a wrapped, we've simplified some things for it, but it's essentially wrapping the record endpoints that you saw. Now, in another release or two, we'll actually give you access to the serialized version of the actual API, the payload, so that you don't have to do the things that you're talking about if you're building in Lightning. And the other benefit for that is, right now, if you're building in Lightning using that mechanism, you are not going to get dinged for API limits. Whereas if you use our REST version, it does count against your enterprise API limits. Now, the good thing about that is we are only charging you for one API call if you make one API call, regardless of the fact that we're making 8 calls behind the scenes to get the layout and the FLS checks and all these other things. So that's actually great for you if you have use cases that fit it. But I hope that answers your question about the security and how to use that.
Yeah, I mean, one limitation I see is if I want to use this in Visualforce, you immediately go to, OK, I'll use Lightning out, and I'll put Lightning Data Service in there, but Lightning Data Service isn't going to work outside of the community templates in Lightning Explorer.
Right. Yeah, I think we had talked about possibly doing Apex support in the future. I don't really know.
Yeah, so our CTO recommended that we look into adding this API to our Ajax toolkit, if you're familiar with that. So we're looking at that as well.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can use the session ID with the REST API does open up the Visualforce use cases.
Unless
you don't have to run the OAuth.
Unless you're a partner selling to a professional edition org, and you don't want to have them run through another partner auth session to get an API-enabled session ID.
Why don't you and I chat? I would like to hear more of your thoughts. But we'll definitely, if you want to hang out, we'll chat after the session.
Okay.
Hi.
Does the API support include being able to get a record layout, page layout, other than the one assigned based on the current user profile and record type?
No. So our kind of raison d'etre is that we're exposing the same kind of middle layer that powers Lightning, and Lightning's oriented towards the context user and just what the context user can see.
I forget what our use case was. I just remember that we wanted to be able to assign a record layout based on other criteria, and I was hoping this might be a way to get around that, but I guess not.
Yeah,
at least not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, I kind of missed the beginning of it. I was just wondering, this API is available for everyone, right? It doesn't need any kind of special permission.
It's available for dev orgs right now, and it's hopefully GA in winter 18.
I mean, just for users that.
For users.
Yeah.
So it does. The API is still controlled by the API-enabled perm that the user profile has.
Yes.
So if you have a user profile that an admin has decided cannot access API, then they cannot access this either.
Yeah.
It's just something that we have to honor for the admins. We don't want to give anybody a backdoor into using API if the admin does not want that user class.
That makes sense. I'm just wondering, for tuning API, you have to be admin to use it. But this one,
no.
just
No.
don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
So would you also return with the record metadata the field set information?
The field set, I'm not.
So field sets are on our roadmap. I didn't show it on the slide, but it is something that we're looking at. I'm actually gathering feedback on what's the best way to expose field sets, because field sets don't have layout metadata. So one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how do we make that useful? What are ways to work around that? I've talked to some partners that use SLDS as a way to figure out how to arrange. In SLDS, you can go, I want 2 columns with 2 rows. And if I give you 4 fields, it just sort of does however you want it to. But that's kind of the feedback that I'm gathering. But yes, it is definitely something that's on our roadmap, but I didn't share it with you.
Will this UI going to support multi-language for, based off the user locale, will the labels change accordingly?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for asking that. That should have probably been on my slide. It is a huge advantage of the user interface API because it does localization and language support.
Yeah.
As the user toggles it, it just changes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have 7 seconds left. One last question.
We'll be
All right.
hanging around here if you want to chat after. So.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I appreciated the opportunity to tell you about our product. And if anybody wants to chat more, give us feedback, ask questions, we'll hang around here and talk to you. Thanks again.
Thanks.